Welcome to Property People, the show for anyone with a passion or interest in property. From design, build, purchase, sale, and everything in between, this show is for you. I'm your host, Andrew Radigan, and I'm the director of Radigan Real Estate, an agency that helps clients buy and sell property in Ireland over €500,000. Please sit back, relax, and enjoy. Welcome to the podcast. We have an expert in with us today doing a bit of a discussion about property, and what we're trying to do is drive as much value for people who may have questions but may not know what to ask. And today we have Dara. He's a seasoned architect with a variety of experience in a number of areas based in the north of Dublin, and we're going to ask him a few questions about the ins and outs of property design, and he might have some advice for everyone throughout. So I hope you find some value from it, and keep listening for more information. Dara, you're very welcome to the podcast.
Thanks very much, Andrew. It's great to be here.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I tell you what, to tell our audience a little bit about what yourself and what it is you do, what got you into architecture in the first place?
Well, when I was in school, I had to decide what subjects to take to the Leaving Cert. So I was interested in science, I was interested in art. So I was kind of thinking of what kind of two things incorporate science and art. So architecture was one of the things on the list. And at the time we were moving house, so there was an engineer involved in doing stuff to the house, so we were living on a building site, and I kind of thought, hey, this is cool, I could do this is interesting, you know, gets you out of the office a bit, and then I also thought about kind of development. I was kind of interested in development, so in the third world at the time, I had just notions about myself. So when I graduated, I ended up working in India for 4 years, and we had a brilliant time. I was there with my wife, and we had a fantastic experience, and we kind of thought that there was nothing really about what we were doing in India that we couldn't more usefully do in Ireland, just from a cultural point of view. So we came back, and she got a job in rehab and I got a job in Ballymun Regeneration, and we did development work, so kind of similar things in Ireland. So Ballymun came to an end in 2013, and I decided to just start up myself and see if I can do development things on my own. So That's where I am. Yeah.
So you didn't, it was, you know, the way I think in Irish ways of doing things, a lot of people think, well, what course do I need to do, or what type of lifestyle do I want? For you, it was actually more of an interest, it piqued your curiosity, and then by travelling you got to see that kind of passion element to it as well.
Yeah, but it's great making things. As a kid, I always loved making things, model airplanes. We had an airport in our house as kids where we all made airplanes, and my next door neighbours made airplanes. We used to fly. So I loved kind of Lego, Meccano, all that kind of making things. Even when I was doing art in my school, we did art metalwork. So it wasn't just painting things, it was kind of making three-dimensional things. And I consider myself very privileged in the fact that I can go to my clients and I can help them make a better place for them to live. I mean, it's actually quite an intimate thing to do for people, you know, and it's wonderful when you get positive feedback. You know, I had one client who said, you know, you've changed our lives. And I said, oh no, wait a second, steady on. I said, no, well, actually, you've changed the way we live. You know, and that's what I try to do. I try to make a better place. Like, it's almost like making a stage set for people to kind of work out the adventure of their lives on. But that stage set is really useful. It should be supportive of the things that people are doing, you know, together.
Yeah, and not just a prescribed example of, well, you live in a 3-bed and this is what you should have. Yeah. And you're really taking the holistic element to what can we create for this person, this family's life.
Yeah, and actually in Irish culture generally, we have a dim view of the arts. I remember in primary school, art was always the thing the teacher did on a Friday afternoon because they didn't have.
You'll never get a job in art. You'll never get a job in art.
Exactly. Yeah. The kind of, there's a lot of attitude of, oh, you're just an art. You just knock up something cheap and quick, and you know, where people's sensibilities for things generally aren't. People aren't encouraged to aspire to good design, and look, if you look at the places we make for people to live, it's semi-detached housing estates in the main, and primary idea behind all those is to make money. I mean, and get planning permission. I mean, there's nothing about designing one house type that faces north, south, east, and west. So you have the same house. It works in one orientation, but not in the other three. Probably that's just bad design. Ballymun regeneration. We're fixing a design problem. The flats were not a good place to live. They didn't support people living out the adventure of their lives, and that cost taxpayers €1 billion in 15 years, knocking them all down and rebuilding them.
And kind of almost that element of being fit for purpose but the wrong purpose and not taken into account. And I think also probably as life changes in Ireland, the standards are so different now that people see what is on offer from a technological point of view, but also from a knowledge point of view in terms of how people live now. Like that's changed from, the dad or whoever goes off to England for 3 months of the year and the mother's at home looking after the kids go to school. And like you said, you're not taking into account how someone lives. So when you actually are looking at it now, a site is almost hindered by what someone has to build rather than what they might want to build.
Yeah, and I get clients saying, surely you have a house plan here that I can just photocopy and put on my site. And I said, no, I don't have any of those, because I've never come across the same client on the same site with the same needs. It just doesn't happen. So we design almost like a bespoke new invention for our clients, and that's a machine for living. Kind of one of the founders of modern architecture had that idea that a house was a machine for living, but the machine needs to work for the people who are living in it. It needs to respond to them, the space outside, the space inside, the weather, and their needs. So, if you like make and pay airplanes and want to have an airport in the back of your house like we had, you need space for that. Whatever it is you do.
You need a mini airplane hangar,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And I think that's a lovely way to look at it, because so many people probably just think a house is a house. And I'm fascinated to ask you a couple of questions about it. So when it comes to that, like you said, people obviously starting off on previous projects and what seemed okay at the time is clearly not suitable nowadays. What's the most common misconception that you see about design or elements of what you do?
Well, design is just a problem solving tool. So mathematicians go to college and they are taught to calculate solutions. Scientists are told to experiment until they find solutions. Designers and architects or designers design solutions, and the way we do that is we draw. So we have a problem that we're faced with. It requires a spatial solution, and so we sketch and draw. And the first sketches you draw might be just bubbles on the page, trying to find the best flow between the rooms. And then you try to make that into a two-dimensional plan where you build in the structure and stuff that you need, and then you think about it in 3 dimensions to try to make those spaces into volumes that respond to each other and the outside and the light and so on. And then when you draw it, you don't draw it right the first time. So
you don't?
No, you have to draw it more than once. So there's a thing a teacher of mine used to say: I don't know what I think until I see what I say. So you draw it and go, oh, I thought that was a good idea, but actually it doesn't work. I have to do it this way. So you draw it again, and then you draw, and that's why we use tracing paper. So you draw overlay and overlay and overlay until you start trying to knuckle down, is this working or is this not working? And it's a bit like painting a picture of somebody. As you're painting it, you kind of get the feeling, oh God, this doesn't look like Andrew at all, But sometimes you're painting the picture and you're kind of, actually, do you know what, I just got him just right. I just got that twinkle in his eye or whatever it was. And then you get into a zone where the design starts coming up with solutions of its own. And you're just facilitating the process, and then you're on a good track with the design. It's a good solution for the problem. But when you're forcing things, so if someone says I have to have this over here, and then it doesn't actually quite work over there, it starts getting difficult to make it work. Then you're not on a winner. You need to think of something else, and there's always another way to do it.
But it's also, I suppose, people's misconceptions about actually design, like you said, which is kind of a square peg round hole. I have to have X in such a space. Whereas when you start sketching and really exploring the space from a kind of an overview, but also taking into the kind of your experience and your expertise and what you've done in the past, you might see that won't work alongside what they're working with, because they might watch Room to Improve or Dermot Bannon or whatever, and they assume, well, sure, Dermot did it in 15 minutes on RT or whoever else, or any other program. And you're then saying, no, well, you don't have that same space. If you don't have an acre and a half in Meath with phenomenal views, it's going to be different than if you're in a built-up area of Dublin or...
But it's even more simple than that. So if we're having a conversation and we are too close together, it's a really uncomfortable experience. If we're too far away from each other, we can't have useful communication with each other.
We need an intercom.
So there's a natural space that you require when you're sitting around on a sofa to have a conversation. It doesn't really matter how big your house is or how expensive your sofa is. That space, that human space, is the same, no matter what your income is.
It's a lovely way to think about it.
Yeah.
And when you think of all the advent of technology in building, in CAD, and how all these, obviously people can build 3D modelling and virtual tours, do you really find that the sketching element of it is still a real core part of what you do and what you enjoy, or is it kind of almost becoming a lost art in a digital age?
Yeah, so it's invaluable because there's a kind of connection between your head and your eye and your hand, and it's making something, and it's that intuitive thing. And you get to a point very quickly where, yes, I know that this is good, this is going to work, and then you need to draw it up more carefully, and that's when we go to the computer at that point. So when I started out in architecture, everything was with a pencil and a piece of paper, and then the computers came along, so you started drawing lines on a flat digital space. But now we draw everything in 3D, so it takes a little bit longer to input the information, but the ability for the client to fly through the project, to see it from the outside, the amount of output we can create with that is phenomenal now. So things like Fortnite, all these gaming programs, they have spin-offs for rendering architectural things. So you can actually kind of get photorealistic images very quickly and very easily now.
So you're appealing to your clients if they have a different way of thinking.
It's very easy I normally show my clients the building 3 different ways. So they can. So I show them the flat 2D drawings. Some people get it, some people don't. Then I show them stills from the outside, so they can see the elevations and the shape of things from the outside. And then I show them the actual model itself and move around the model. So by the time we're moving around the model, they're really understanding what the space is, and they can see the connection between the plan and the spaces that they're seeing. And also, I always say to people, this thing of, when on the TV shows, oh my God, it's so big. I'm not doing my job if people are coming in to the finished building and they're saying something like that. That means they haven't understood what they're getting. So part of my job is to get them to understand what they're actually going to. So I want my clients to come in, this is exactly what I wanted. This is exactly how I imagined it. There should be no surprises.
Like there shouldn't be a big reveal. It should be a case of that they understood from start to finish.
That's just for TV.
Yeah. And I think it's very interesting when you mentioned about the 3 options that you show people, or the 3 ways of drawing it out for them in different ways, because I've often found, as in property myself, I will see people who will walk through a property and one of them will be looking at the floor plan and not the property itself because they think spatially different, and someone else who has to feel the house. And I think when you appeal to the variety of ways we all process imagery, information, figures, and obviously different views of what things could become, it probably makes it more of a cohesive process where everyone feels like they're a part of it, rather than the old adage of, oh, sure, she does everything that way and I'll leave that bit to her. You're appealing to your clients on a broader spectrum where they understand what they're a part of, rather than, like you said, wait till the end and go, oh, so that's what you meant.
So we've developed a process that I think works really well for people, and what we do is we don't just show them one version of one solution to their problem. We show them 3 different solutions to the problem. And what we try to do is we try to express the solution to the problem in different ways. So we might have a minimal version, we might have a maximal version, and we might have something in between. And it's a bit like going in and trying on a jacket. You know, you don't go into Louis Copeland's and just try on one jacket. You try on a few. You know, you have to get your size right. Is it right in my shoulders? Is the sleeve the right length? Is the material the right feel? Is this one comfortable or is not comfortable? Is the colour right for me? Is the cost right? You know, there's so many different, and you need to try on the different options to feel just exactly what you're, to feel the difference between the two. So people might see the maximal option and say, do you know what, that's really good, but actually the minimal option gives us exactly what we're looking for too, for half the cost, or you know, and they're able to make that comparative judgment, and it also means that they join the design conversation. Yeah. If I only show them one picture or one drawing and one image, they don't have a choice. They don't have any way to input into that. I don't know how they live. They know how they live better than I do. So the process of debating the three different options, the whys and wherefores, allows them join into the design discussion. So what I try to do is it's not an either or decision, it's a both and. So the idea is to get to a fourth option where we remove the things that we don't like, but we include all the bits that we like. So our job is to kind of synthesize all three ideas. So we show different kitchen layout in three different ways. We show where the sitting room could be three different ways. We can turn the couch around three different ways. We can put the dining table, you know, make a little one or a bigger one or whatever. But and they can say, actually, you know, we don't need to sit 12. We only need to sit 8 or 4. And suddenly now I'm learning an awful lot about how they're going to inhabit this space, and that's really, really useful feedback.
Well, also you're taking the passive element out of, because I think a lot of the time the way people's notions or experience in the past might have been, the only thing you bring to the table is a rough idea of what you want, roughly. In the past, obviously, you might have some magazine cutouts of something you liked and a budget. And you then almost take a passive approach, whereas you're really saying, no, let's all sit down, let's all really look at what part of life matters most to you. Because like you said, one person is going to be entertaining the extended family morning, noon and night. The others, it could be, I want you know, a beautiful reading space right beside a space that's kind of like maybe a high traffic area. How are we going to make that work? And then the role it plays on the property, and then obviously the small. And
the feedback is, I hate that, or I love that, or I never thought of that. So getting I hate that is actually really good feedback for me, because that just doesn't work well for them. There's no point in suggesting. So we definitely need not to do that, you know. And so sometimes people are really, really good. They see it straight off. Sometimes people need to see another version. And when the fourth option comes, there's always a little tweak, which is really good as well. It means people are engaging with it and are struggling to get it just right, which is exactly what I want, because they have to contribute to the process for the process to be successful.
But also allow them to find their feet. I think what you're saying is you're giving someone the chance where the idea is that you guide them, but you're also giving advice. But like you said, when someone's tweaking, it means that they've understood how they got to that level, rather than the classic thing which I've often seen, which is, oh, can we just move that wall? And you're like, well, no, that wall was the key feature that we talked about 18 steps ago. Whereas when you involve them in it, it must be a very empowering thing for a client to understand and not feel they're just leaving you to it.
But there also gives them clarity about why they are doing it, because they see the things that don't work and they understand why this works. So when you get to site then, and you're there's none of this kind of rethinking, oh, maybe we put the room in the wrong place. That's all done. And it gives people a lot of confidence and certainty about what they're doing. So when you get to site, it's just executing. It's not, we're just building it. We're not redesigning it or rethinking it. We're just, the imagination is being manifest on site. You know, you just
the digital or design brain dump has been done in the office, and you spend the time kind of almost like prepping, like a painter. They say that 90% of the work is in the prep. Does that make it easier for the likes of when you're then working with subcontractors and builders, that the vision is far clearer and you're not spending days standing in, on a site when the foundations have been laid and you're trying to talk them around a certain space that you would have in the past?
So all those little things about, what size the window is, maybe it should be a bit bigger, maybe it should, we've done all that, and so if a window is supposed to line up with a door, we can't go changing that position of the window because it needs to line up with the door. And people understand the reason for that feature, and there's a reason beyond the window, which another event that's probably the reason for that. So they're very often they have confidence that the design is the right one, and then they don't need to change it. And now it does take a little bit more time at the start, but it's the biggest value add we bring.
Really,
and it's pure design. It's doing it a number of times, and I guess from our point of view, we never draw anything that we don't like. So no matter which one they pick, is fine. It's fine with us. It's almost like deciding between your kids at some stage. Sophie's choice.
There's a piece of you in all of them.
Yeah.
But I also think then that probably gives. I think when you think of creativity, a lot of people probably automatically, much like if you ask me, do I play a musical instrument? They almost put themselves down and say, well, that's not my thing. Whereas by doing this process, you're giving people the opportunity to kind of explore what they thought, what they actually know deep down, even if it's in layman's terms.
Exactly.
You said, giving someone an open forum to say, I see what you've done there, but I actually hate that. But again, they're not rejecting you, they're just rejecting the idea. But if you hadn't explored it, you wouldn't get a sense of what matters to them.
And I guess it all breaks down to the flow through the house. That's the key thing. So last year, I think I worked on projects from 50 grand to 7.5 million. And it was the same issue for a house. It was the same problem the clients had. What is the flow? What's the sequence of spaces that I need? What's the function of each space? How are they connected to each other? And how are they connected to the outside? How does that outside relate to the light? So all the rooms are lit naturally. Obviously, you want to have a view and the light, and that's that flow through the house. That is the key question to crack when you're thinking about a house. What are the main spaces? How are they connected together? And it's, like I said at the start, it's that finding the balance between those things and making the connections between those things. And then everything else then reinforces that idea. So the colour, the texture, the height of the ceiling, the finish of the floor, all of that. Once you have that idea, then I have to use this material, not that material, because that isn't going to work. This is going to reinforce that idea.
But you're also, the prep work then leads you to where it's a much more singular kind of focused decision then based on you've already organised the space. Materials then follow, because most clients probably don't take into account the actual doing of the work after the design, whereas in your mind you're thinking, okay, that's a 15-foot ceiling, that changes the narrative of how this space comes together, and also what textures will work and what won't work. But you're almost a few steps ahead of the client, saying, well, let's discuss the space you need now, and then you're able to kind of guide them on what that next part means.
A big thing would be structural changes. So in actual fact, putting in steel for a builder most of the time isn't a big deal. It's a kind of week's work. You have to dig a hole, put in the foundations, brace the wall, put in the beam. I mean, it's not that. It's putting everything back together again is the expensive bit. It's not the structure itself. So when people say, oh, now we want to knock down that wall and open up the room, if it's a structural wall, you kind of say, well, we can do that. And actually, maybe that is absolutely the most important thing to do. So we need to put in the structure. But on the other hand, if you say, well, that's a structural wall and it's holding up 3 floors of stuff, why don't we open the room up that way where it's a lot easier to do that? And people will when they understand that, they'll say, yes, we're going to spend the money on the structure because it's the right thing to do, or no, let's not get into all that headache because we have modest means or small project or small budget or whatever, but let's achieve the same thing but in a different way that's more simple and direct, maybe. And in the discussion with them, you can tell quite easily which way is the right way for them to go. And again, it's trying to find that balance between things, you know.
And it's probably that kind of, you have that outside eye being able to understand structure and design, but you also then, because you have a keen sense of people when you work with them, you see a common thread with everybody. Like you said, you're going to have, much like a doctor that comes in and says 20 people have roughly the same question, and when you see enough people, you know the same question. You know, my elbow sore, my arm, whatever it might be. And you're almost then saying, right, well, you know, Andrew's been in with me and he keeps talking about his kids and he keeps talking about this trampoline in the back garden or whatever. So that's different to a couple who are reconfiguring a place where they might have 5 bedrooms and they want to turn it into 2 large bedrooms with ample room downstairs for living in, you know, post kids. But you're listening to everything they say. And they probably don't realise that though.
And there is a kind of a palette of spaces that people need. So that the kitchen, living, dining space. Everyone kind of needs one of those. But you also need like kind of a breakout room for teenagers or to watch the match in, or TV room. Having that noise in the middle of the room, the main room. Sometimes there's more. Maybe you need a breakout room. Maybe you need an office. Maybe you need an exercise room or something to support the things that you do.
Safe room to hide in when you're in trouble.
I
could do with one of those.
You need a laundry space. You need, you know, a storage space. These are kind of ubiquitous things everybody needs. The difference is the connection between them varies. The site varies. The structure on the site varies. You know, every time. So it's kind of the same problem, but you're coming up with new ideas all the time because it's never the same problem. Does that make sense? Absolutely,
yeah, but it's also, it's a fascinating way to kind of see the human condition, because we all are very individual in so many ways. But then when it's like, who was it that said, if you want to get to know someone, you know, watch them eat. If you know, so when they don't know you're looking. When you watch how people live, like obviously that's meant to be your safest space. So when you take into account what you discussed about the misconceptions of people, what they think design is, almost your ethos with design, which you've discussed there, you're kind of taking into account the kind of human condition of how we live, as well as the practicality of someone who cares and says, listen, I know you want this, but let's hash this bit of it out more. It's a great open space now, and when you have one party a year, but 90% of the time, if there's a football game on or a rugby game in the background, or you're trying to have a coffee with a friend, you'll know all about both sides of the room, because there won't be enough space for everybody.
And then it's also like a stage set. So over time, like you were saying, it changes. So, you know, you're going to get new photos of the kids to put on the wall, or they're going to get, you know, a gold medal somewhere and you want to put it up there, or, you know, you're going to want to change the colour of the place. You're going to want to change the furniture. You know, every 15 years, you're going to have to change the heating system. Every 30 years, you're going to have to change the windows. The building has a kind of a life of its own. It requires maintenance, requires change. So the stage set idea is to facilitate all those things. So you're not burying things in the wall where they're going to be difficult to get at. You're trying to facilitate changes so they're going to be easy to make in the future. That changing the function of the rooms is easy. You can move your furniture around afterwards and still create a more harmonious flow as things change within your family, you know.
But you look into the kind of the future element of it. I like that idea, but it's also, you're not just giving someone what they want today, you're giving someone the opportunity to explore what they may want in the future. And it's not that you're pushing it on them, but by virtue of your experience, like you said, if I go through a period where I want to turn one room into a home office, and I say, well, it doesn't matter about access to toilets or to space or light, because it's only my office. And then lo and behold, 2 years later, it becomes a playroom, a child's bedroom, a cinema room, but you want to be within earshot of the kids. How do you create that space? And you're kind of asking that question. That's really interesting. I think that's probably something that a lot of people probably don't think to explore, because they're probably so overwhelmed at the beginning of a project. So it's good to have that guidance.
Also with things, for example, with bathroom, I always think there's a kind of an extreme. There's a kind of the bathroom on an aeroplane, which is about as small a space as you possibly can make it to do your stuff in there. And then there's the Imelda Marcos bathroom suite, which I'm sure was probably bigger than most people's apartments. You
Yes,
know?
yeah.
So there's a spectrum between the two, and some people like the boudoir. You know, they want to spend time there. They have their clothes collection and they have all their jewelry and their makeup, and they want to have a space for all that, and that's fine.
Yeah.
But other people say, no, I want to have the space for living or whatever. So I'm gonna, you know,
my bed is for sleeping in. I want to live in the rest.
Yeah, exactly.
And then,
yeah,
someone else who maybe aspires to be Carrie Bradshaw or a male version of it. We all know that there's men who love their shoes and clothes. But again, it's asking that question as to what it is that they want, and then being able to
exactly. Yeah. So knowing your own needs and where you fit across those kind of spectrum of different things, you know, is really useful. And of course, they're all designed spaces, so you have to design the little loo, like the airplane loo, really carefully, you know, because you're trying to make it as efficient as possible in spatial terms. You're overlapping things and, you know, having things cheek by jowl. You know, in the other one, you also need to bring a different design kind of sensibility to it. So you have more space to play with, but that doesn't make it any easier. You know, it's a different target you're trying to reach. You know, so. So in the start, you're trying to facilitate these spaces to do those things, and as the project progresses, then you're picking colours, you're picking furniture, you're filling out the room with materials, and so it has the finished look. It's a little bit like a guy I saw on Netflix recently was talking about car design. So car design has the shape of the car. It's the first thing. And then the second thing they look at are the moulding of the panels. That's the next layer they kind of look at. And then the third layer is the trim on the car. Which little bits of silver trim go around the window or the bumpers and all that kind of stuff. And it's a bit like that with architecture too. You know, you have to get the shape of it right, then you have to get the materials right, and then the trim and the finishes and all the details. The things you touch, the taps, the door handles, you know, they're things you come in contact with every day. They need to be good. You know, they need to respond to your idea of what is good. You know?
Yeah, but it's also that experiential thing. And like you were saying, so on that kind of basis, when it comes to, I mean, Ireland, we all know, has probably a very interesting climate, is probably the best way to put it. And we're not exactly able to set our watch by, you know, bright days and spring and summer starting and finishing. I think sometimes it's the most unusual weather where you could have snow one day and a record-breaking heat the following week. So to that extent, when you're taking into account people's needs and obviously the design, what role do you find that light plays when you're building or designing that people may not have either taken into account? Because you'll get some people who'll know where due west is by virtue of maybe they're a sailor or they're, you know, walking and they naturally know. And you might have someone else that doesn't give a tuppence about light. They say, listen, that doesn't bother me.
Yeah.
What's part of that process?
Yeah, so everyone's affected by light. So, you know, in the middle of the day at noon, the sun is due south. So in the winter it's lower in the sky, in the summer it's higher in the sky. You're really trying to capture the main living rooms. Ideally you want them to get that southwesterly light, so you want the rooms you spend the most time in with that lovely warm sunshine all through the afternoon and all through the evening. That's the kind of ideal. But the morning light is kind of associated with bedrooms, with that idea of wishing back the curtains and seeing the sunrise.
Yes.
You know? But we spend most of our time in the bedrooms at night time when there is no sun. We don't, my teenagers spend an inordinate amount of time in their bedrooms.
I would say so, yeah. We've all heard about that part of the life, yeah.
And then there's north light, and people, when they think about north light, they think, oh, it's a disaster, it's dark, and you know, but actually it's really good for TVs, for screens, for offices, for art studios, for any of that stuff where you need a consistent level of light. So when you're talking about making a room or making a piece of architecture, you're actually using the light as much as you can to enhance the experience of being in the room. I mean, you really have to understand where the sun is going to be in the sky. So you're almost turning the rooms around to take advantage of the sun. You're cranking up the roof to let the light in. You're twisting a wall so you can get a little piece of light in. All the time you're trying to manage the light in the building, control the light in the spaces to reinforce the idea behind the sequence of rooms and so on.
Yeah.
It's absolutely critical to get that right. I mean, when I was in college, we were in our first year, we were all struggling with the process of design and trying to come up with cool things to do. And this guy made a big tower house, but he forgot to put windows in. So the tutor said, "You've no windows in the room." And he goes, "Okay." So the next week he puts the same drawing on the wall, except he's drawn this big long cable and a little light bulb at the bottom. And he says, "I nailed the light problem, though."
I love it.
That isn't what we meant.
Yeah, it's very funny though, because it's something that also when people think of a certain site. So if you're in a certain part of an estate or a certain part of a road or whatever orientation, and most people don't have a completely blank canvas or a blank site to be able to reconfigure the space. They're working with something that they bought a number of years ago, months ago. Is there an element of trying to educate people on what could be done budget-wise to change the light? So someone may say, I want a big, kind of fabulous extension to the rear, but by virtue of being overlooked on one side and the light not hitting a certain space, they mightn't have thought of the implications of what that means. Is there a kind of an element of educating people when it comes to the importance of light as well?
Yeah, I remember when I started out in business, I did these speed dating gigs at the Ideal Homes exhibition or the Ploughing Championships. The Architects Institute had a kind of a setup where you could give out free consultations to people. And almost everybody I spoke to had a big house and they wanted to build an extension. And they had in their head, I have to build more. And almost everybody I talked to, I was trying to convince them that they didn't need to do anything. There was a woman living in a 4-bed house on her own, and she wanted to build an extension. I was like, why? There has to be space in this house you're not using. Use that first, and then see if you need an extension. And all of them didn't have a good idea about the light. So very often they were building on the north side of they were building away from the sweet spot, away from the view, maybe where they had extra space they didn't use or didn't want, but it wasn't the right place to put the spaces that they live in every day. The space you use most should have the lion's share of the light. The utility room, the toilet, all those kind of things. If you think about the amount of time you spend in there, you don't need those rooms well lit. You can stick them in the middle of the plan.
Yeah.
Stick all the living rooms out where you have the view, where you have the light.
Absolutely,
It's actually not good for your soul. Living in an interior room and no windows. It's not a good place to be.
No, I can imagine. But that also shows that I think when people want to extend and they have an area of their land or their house that they don't like, they think by adding something in that void or space, that doesn't mean that they're going to want to use that space anymore, because their relationship with that space is already, we all have that area of the house where, that's the corner of the side passage, that doesn't get any light, and that's where we throw the bins. But if you're trying to replace it and then suddenly hope it's a bright space and full of light, that space already is what it is. It already was that when you bought it. And if you're not encouraging someone to maybe think, well, yes, but why don't you put like you said, the toilet? Not many, but I'm sure some people spend longer in the toilet than they should. But in terms of taking time to reflect and enjoy the sun, it's not really where I'd want to say I got my tan, to be honest with you. But that's probably something most people don't think of. And I guess you need to, just like doing the options, you need to try it on. You need to draw it up. You need to see what it's like. You need to see, if I make this taller, can I catch the light and bounce the light off the ceiling down into the room? Is there a way of putting a slot in the ceiling, make a roof light to get it in? What's the view like? So I might get lots of light, but if I get too much
light during the day and I'm trying to watch the TV in that space, it's not going to be a pleasant. I'm going to have the curtains closed the whole time.
Or you're cursing it and it becomes the opposite to what the intention was.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. And out of interest, that'll bring me on to my next question. So what's the most common kind of issue or challenge that you face with the design? So like you've kind of explained that you kind of have that 3-tiered approach, but what would be the most common, I suppose, problem or thing that raises its head?
It's back to that flow. It's
Really?
Getting the flow of the rooms right. There's they call it the architectural promenade. It would be so.
That's very fancy.
When you come in the front door, what spaces do you walk through? Where do you live your life? Where do you spend your time? And that has to be supportive of the way you want to do it. So, if you like sitting around the island in the kitchen, that needs to be in the right place. If you prefer sitting down at the dining table and doing your work and your art and your laundry and your on the that's needs. So you have that to get that flow between where you cook, where you eat, where you sit down and relax. Getting that flow right within the house, getting the connection to the outside space, getting the connection to the sun. That's the nub of the problem in terms of houses and setting up your house to support the way you want to live.
And do you get a lot of pushback from people when it comes to the importance you put on flow? Because I always equate it to every kind of part of our lives. There's always kind of the main thing that people almost don't necessarily either hear or want to hear. So, like when a doctor says, you've got to eat healthy and get your exercise. Like, I know my 5 things a day and X, Y, Z. And you almost switch off until you're sick, where you got to go, sorry, what was I supposed to do? When it comes to the explaining the importance of flow, do you kind of convert people or do they understand? Obviously, you're not trying to force anybody, but is it something that people take to quite quickly, or is it something that can take that time to kind of show how important it is in the greater property?
So whether they realise it or not, that's actually the problem that most of them are trying to solve in the first place. So most people ring me, they already know why it doesn't work. That's why they're ringing me. And sometimes I just simplify it down to just drawing bubbles on the plan drawing. So you have a place to cook, you have a place to eat, a place to relax. So where should the relaxed place be relative to the eat, relative to the cook? Where should the door to the garden be? Where do you want that between the dining table or do you want it off the dining table so you can open the doors and you don't have to move the table to eat outside, just let the outside in, that's getting those bubbles right. Is the order of them, the connection is one thing, then getting the size of each of them right is the next thing, and getting the connection with the space outside is really important, I think, and then making sure the space outside is inviting all that lovely light in is another thing. So and that's the back to the balance and the connections. So you're trying to find a balance between all of these things, and you're trying to make those connections to reinforce the idea. So you have kind of a compelling organisational idea about your house.
That's aesthetically pleasing.
Yeah.
It's really interesting. I mean, it's when I look at it, I suppose like everything, when you look at the elephant in the room when it comes to we all have these lovely ideas. I could sit down and say I want a fabulous XYZ at the back and I'm going to open this out and double height extension. Budget obviously plays an inherent role. So obviously you're trying to create what someone would like for the future, have them happy about it, but also you've got to guide them on where the money is best spent versus yes, you could spend X on this part of the project, but that'll then suddenly render another part, an inherent part, useless or not possible at all. What kind of role does budget play, especially nowadays? Because I mean, you're going to have people that are trying to rejig a space that they want to live in forever, or they're working with a specific budget and the budget mightn't meet the dream. Yeah.
So when we're doing the 3 options, obviously we keep the budget in mind. So if it's 50 grand, we're going to be coming up with a certain set of solutions. If it's 5 million, it's a completely different set of solutions.
Yeah.
But you got to respect the budget and have tailor your options to suit it in the first place. But very often, once we have a kind of a rough idea about how much space the budget can get us, we don't worry about the budget. We're trying to find that compelling organisational idea of the house. Once you have that, then you can shrink it, you can crush it, you can condense it, you can simplify it, and you can change. You can hang on to the idea, but just express it in a different way to fit into the budget. Also, we provide the client with information. We let them make the decisions. I mean, they're the boss, right? So they can see between the minimal and the maximal approaches. And some people say, that big idea there looks great, but I don't have the money for that. I'm going to save my money and do the small thing. Or some people say the opposite. They say, we really like that idea, but we need to make it bigger, and we're going to save up and we're going to invest, and get it right.
Make it happen, yeah.
Very often when you go to do something, if you want to build this, but only have the money for this, just build this. Just build what you can well. And then if you need more, get the money for more, but try not to, there's no magic wand with the budget. There was 14% construction inflation last year. I mean, it's not slowing down anytime soon. So you need to be kind of realistic. There's lots of good designers out there. The great architects are guys who could persuade people to build and actually finished beautiful buildings. That they're famous architects. If you're just designing good stuff that you can't realize or is outside the budget, then you're just a designer.
And that's, I suppose, as a standalone, that's great to have someone if that's what they set out to do. But in your line of work, it's theory and practice and execution at the same time. And when you're trying to get someone to work with a certain budget, it's much like you said, though, because I think people often think, let's make such and such bigger and therefore it'll be better. But then the quality element of it goes out the window because they're trying to make it work. And obviously you have to take a very respectful approach to that as well, because in my line of work, when I have clients that I'm trying to help buy property, it's never lost on me when someone has a certain budget. I don't take it for granted that someone has 200,000, 800,000 or 8 million. And relative to that person, it's a very important sum of money that has to get them to a certain destination. So when you're guiding someone on that part of the budget, it's probably something many people need to hear, which is, if it's going to be a smaller space, but you can go all out the way you want to go all out and it'll become what you want, or we can just literally make this, and obviously you're not going to want to do it because it's not in line with your overall ethos anyway, is create a space that is kind of like a glorified warehouse that doesn't have that sense of soul and flow. And
the classic mistake sometimes people make is, that extension across the whole width of the house. So now they have a beautiful new room with lots of windows, lots of light, great connections to the garden, but then they forget the two rooms that were at the back of the house are now landlocked. They're light locked in the middle of the plan. So you've created some lovely new space, but you've left behind unusable space, undesirable space right in the middle of your house. I always try to advise people not to build extra unless it's going to be useful and connected back, and you're going to be able to use it three different ways. Just building out for the look of it, or because that's the image you want.
But that's what the Joneses did, so we have to do the same.
I need more convincing than that most of the time. I need to be certain that that's really, really what they want to do and spend their money on. Or maybe there's a way to do what the Joneses did down the road, but actually get it more useful and more integrated into your house, But it's probably, what I hear there when you say that is you're looking at, and not from a murder mystery, but you're looking at the motive behind what someone's doing from a caring approach. And I think sometimes it's very easy when you look at any kind of a service or any kind of a professional interaction people have that, it's not that you are buying a coffee and you exchange a certain amount and you in turn get a cup with coffee in it or whatever drink it might be. You're trying to drive that inherent value for people where you're saying, look, I respect you enough to challenge you on this question. And again, like you said, it's like in my line of work, if someone chooses to overpay for something, that is entirely their opinion, their right to do so. But I would be remiss if I didn't put my hand up and say, just so you know,
past this point is a passion play and not a practicality play. And if they decide to heed my advice, great. But from a design point of view, you're almost, from a caring point of view, calling someone out in a respectful tone where you're saying, look, is this because the house across the road just spent 800 grand on doing something that looks fabulous, but we don't know how they live? Or do you realise that you could make this smaller space really flow beautifully and it'll actually make complete sense when it's all done? But it's really interesting that you're not just kind of saying, okay, yeah, thank you, next. You draw it up and move it on, because that's not what you want. That's not in line with how you do things.
Yeah. So look, it happens sometimes where we're advising one thing and the client says, no, we don't want to do that. We want to do this.
Yeah.
When I'm in that situation, I try to understand why they want to do it a different way, because what they're trying to they're coming up with their own solution for their own problem. It's an opportunity for me to learn about their problem and understand what their problem is. So why are they doing it that way? And maybe there is a better way of doing it than they think. Maybe I can add value to what they want to do.
Yeah, or at least offer an alternative approach.
Exactly.
And if they then say, listen, we really appreciate the thought, but this is it's a bee in my bonnet, and that's it. But I think a lot of it about what you're saying is that you've said it or broached that subject. And I think that's a big part of it for clients, is that it's not trying to be pushy, and you're not pushing your dream on someone, but you are saying, listen, I have to say this so you're aware that this is what I see from experience. And after that, I'm here, I'll support you. And it sounds funny because you're talking about a structure and design and a building process that involves materials and builders, and it's to what many would seem an inanimate object. But going back to your original point of the flow, the heart, the life that becomes part of that new design has to be questioned at times, so people understand that when they do move in and it's done, this is what you wanted.
Yeah.
But that's very important.
And also for the two of us, Andrew, like we do what we do every day of the week, right? Where most of our clients, this is a one-hit wonder. They'll buy a house once or twice in their lifetime, maybe. They'll do it up once or twice, maybe, in their lifetime. So it's a massive investment for them. And they're contacting guys like us because we do it every day. What they're, it's a one-hit wonder for them. I'm designing houses every day.
It's like a stockbroker, it's like a dentist. Anyone in their field, what's normal to them is a huge outlay for someone else. Someone looking to invest goes to someone who's in pensions or the equivalent. They want genuine kind of practical advice on the ground, but they also, I think, need that element of functionality. How do you live? How long do you plan on using this for? What it is your timeline and your expectations? And what if, both your children are 12 and 15, how long do you think it is before they're going to want to move on? So could this playroom become something else in the meantime?
Of course.
And I think I think also it's having that open dialogue, but it also takes away the ego element as to why we say things. So you're not saying it at a cocktail party or you're playing Trivial Pursuit and you're trying to show a fact because you want to kind of be one of the gang. When you say something by virtue of what you see day in, day out, you're just noting with someone who may not have even thought about it, and then afterwards say, God, I never saw that side, and A, let's discuss it further, or B, I'm still going to go this way. But by virtue of what you do day in, day out, that just gives people that kind of sense of what to look for.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. And when you don't get it right, or when they don't go for the design, like I said, it's an opportunity to understand where they're coming. The better I can understand my clients, the more easily I'm able to find a good solution that fits them.
Yeah, absolutely. Much like you'll have families that want an 80-inch screen TV for family get-togethers and cartoons, and someone else that wants the equivalent of. I had someone earlier this week who literally was viewing a property based on how many books it could hold. So they were looking at walls end to end and saying, could this hold my collection, or will it impose on where I live? And that's what makes us all so different in so many ways. But then the commonality is we all have to figure a way to put it together from a practical standpoint. It's fascinating. And in terms of the most unique or unusual design that you would have done, because obviously you do a range of different styles and you're in a range of different types of properties and different types of consultancy, what would be the most standout project that you would have done? You don't have to give names, but it's more to kind of give people a sense of something that was maybe outside the box or off the wall or never done before?
Yeah, I guess the purest kind of design project I've done was when I was in India. I was working in a centre that provided services for kids with disabilities, and it was an inclusive community. So there was people from every race and creed there, and the person who was running the place decided they wanted a meditation room. But the meditation room couldn't be a Hindu temple, it couldn't be a Muslim mosque, it couldn't be a Christian church, but it had to be a sacred space. So it had to be a place where Hindus, Muslims and Christians could understand it as a sacred place and would be encouraged to meditate and pray in the spot in this room. So she started saying, I want a circular room. So what we ended up doing was and I say we because it was a conversation between her, my boss, and there was also an engineer who was working on the job. So we ended up with a circular room in the middle, but it was surrounded by a square. And the gap between the circle and square was the place that we let the light and the air in. So when you're inside the room, it was lit by this glow in the walls. And you couldn't actually see outside from inside the building, but it was well lit. So even when you looked up at the ceiling, there was a kind of a brick dome on the building with a little cupola, a little light well at the top. But when you looked up, all you could see was the glowing surface of the top of the cupola. And it worked really well from an environmental point of view. So it was really hot in the summers there. So no matter which way the wind was blowing, there was one corner of the building facing the wind and one corner of the building facing away from the wind. So the shape of the building encouraged this natural air-conditioned flow through the building. We built it half on land, half over a pond. So on one side there was a kind of balcony looking over a pond, which was really beautiful. On the other side you obviously went in the door. But it was that whole idea that you're in this in-between spiritual place that was kind of in between heaven and earth, in between God and your soul, and that was kind of try to encourage that spiritual effect in the building. But also from a building point of view, it was quite funny because we built a corbelled brick dome on it. So we laid one row of bricks on day one to make the roof, and the next day the bricklayers come along and we told them to lay another layer of bricks, but this time push the bricks in a little bit, and every day it grew in a little bit until we made a dome. So this was fine. This went on fine for the first week, but the second week when they started, they all started complaining. They said, it's not safe anymore, because they could see the bricks coming up, right? There was 7 layers of bricks and it was leaning in like this, and they were afraid that the thing was going to fall over. So the engineer came and said, the lads, they're going to go on strike, they're not going to build anymore because it's unsafe. So I said, I'll tell you what to do. You go up on top, you tell them all to meet in the middle of the building, right? And you go up on top of the scaffold and jump on top of the brick dome, and I'll stand underneath you. and it's not going to fall over, because we know it's not going to fall over. But that's a way to show them that so it was like a test of faith in myself and the engineer. So the engineer got up and he started jumping up and down on the bricks. Of course, the bricks all tightened in on each other. They had nowhere to fall. I mean, that was the whole premise of the design. And they were all looking at me thinking, oh no, it's fine. So they got back up and we worked away and we finished it. It's a beautiful building. It works really well. That's
unbelievable. So like they're looking at you thinking, this guy's going to meet his maker in the very room that he's trying to create. But it just shows you though that there's that kind of real wholesome element to what it is you were trying to build. So I think I could ask a lot of people about different projects they've done, and not that I think it just shows that everyone's version of winning or everyone's version of success is so different, that you didn't say to me it was a giant development on Ormond Quay, Grand Canal, or somewhere in London or whatever, that was X number of square metres of commercial space. And that's not to take away from what it is that they do. I mean, I think all architecture can be a feat of amazing kind of design strength and execution. But the fact that you talked about a room that is meant to appeal to a wide audience of those of different faiths, who you don't want to ostracize any of them. You want to be respectful of the room it is, but then you're also trying to create on top of that a layer of the physical element of creating a space. Because we can all say, you know, I want a room that will appeal to a Catholic, a Protestant, a Muslim and everything else, and it could then might suddenly become a room that just has a lot of different walls with different effigies of different religions, and they're kind of trying to tick the boxes that way, whereas you did it with the flow and then the design element at the end, which is the funniest, but also it shows you the kind of hands-on passion you can have for a project where good luck trying to do that in Ireland. You know, you'd need someone standing on a ladder to change a light bulb to make sure you adhere to health and safety. So you were able to get up there and go, listen lads, I'll stand under. The proof in the pudding is in the not in the eating but in the not dying. And then even better, you got an engineer and not a normal Joe So, because when an engineer gets up there, because I have a family member who's in engineering and he won't get into a lift. It's a common theme I've seen with some engineers that they just don't want to get into it, and I don't know whether that's because they know what is actually holding it together. You know, like someone who tells you about fast food, they know the secret. So the fact that an engineer got on it and did it to prove a point was even better. And I suppose to finish, what would be the one piece of advice that you would give someone looking to start a project or explore this kind of, because obviously you're going to have some people that have spent a number of years ifing and butting and then circumstances change, or they might buy a space that, you know, life took hold, so they might have bought somewhere they planned to leave and they can't. What kind of advice would you give to someone exploring it, whether it be someone with the big budget and loads of space or someone with no space that has to just reconfigure it? What would be that kind of simple starting point?
So, like, get help. Right, get someone who, like an architect who does it every day, or an interior designer if you're just remodeling. They're gonna really add value to your project, and then get the flow right. Because getting the connectivity between the different spaces, knowing what the different spaces are, knowing how to connect them, knowing how to relate them to the light. That's the secret of success, and knowing that it's right for you. So it doesn't have to be right for everybody. It needs to be right for you. And then, you know, just thinking a little bit beyond to try to make it flexible, to make it, you know, to try to think of it in different ways. So you can reimagine it quite easily without knocking down walls or anything. But I think understanding that flow and then creating that compelling organizational idea around that flow. Once you have that, all of the other questions will fall out of the solution to that problem. From what we make it from, what the colour has to be, what, you know, where did the kitchen go, where's the knife and fork drawer, you know, all of those little and there's hundreds of thousands of decisions you make when you do up a house. Thousands and thousands of them, right? They all fall out of getting that organizational idea right and being clear about it.
And I think it's also something that probably people don't necessarily think of because of when they look at budgets and spending money, because some people would be very sensitive to spending money on what they deem, oh well, sure, I can figure that out, or they go to a cut price service or offering where they go, oh, someone can draw it, sure, a building is a building. The takeaway is probably don't be afraid to invest hard-earned money in someone or some service that really gives you that kind of guidance throughout, rather than just assuming, well, anyone can do it. Because like you used the term speed dating earlier on, there's an architect and there's a service for everybody, and everyone is different in their own way, and they'll be drawn to you for a different reason that they'll be drawn to me or someone else. But it's really putting the value in that kind of groundwork that they could do.
And like for an example of that would be, I have a client at the moment who got a draftsman to draw a house for himself, for this guy, and he drew a huge thing. But when the planners asked him to employ an architect and revise the design, so he came to me, and we've actually ended up with something less than half the size of what he originally designed, because actually he doesn't need more than that. So when we started talking about the budget, he said, "Oh no, don't worry about the budget. You've already, have the budget. I've already got to build twice as much, so that's not a problem anymore."
And then by virtue of that conversation, though, you've then changed his experience of what, and again, it is his experience. So you're part of meeting someone, but at the core of what you do is knowing and acknowledging that you're kind of with someone for that period of time, almost like on their journey, like on your travels. You're going to meet people along the way. You play a pivotal role in their life for that period of time, but you're also looking 10 years down the line and saying, I'm now leading you, kind of like someone who's learned to cycle the bike.
Exactly.
You've led them on, and now they're going on into the distance in the proverbial car park, and hopefully they don't fall down.
Yeah.
But I love that. I think it's lovely to see a really kind of a passionate approach married alongside the expertise. I'm looking forward to our next chat, and I'm looking forward to talking to you next week about our next part of the project.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks, Andrew.
Not at all. Thank you for joining us today. We're going to put Dara's details in the show notes, and please join us for our next episode where we'll be discussing something else about architecture. That's it for another show. If you have any comments, questions, or want to get in touch, I would love to hear from you. If you like what you hear, please feel free to share with colleagues, family, and friends. Until next time, I've been your host, Andrew Rattigan, and you have been listening to Property Peak.